Good evening, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for tuning in to the Right to Justice Cite and Release webinar. We're really excited that you're here and looking forward to this conversation. First, I want to let everyone know that we will have interpretation available tonight for Spanish language, and so we're going to take a moment to get directions on that. I'm going to pass to Maria Garza.
Hello. We are going to be doing interpretation for this meeting.
Hola a todos, mi nombre es Gloria Delgadillo y soy parte de COMAL, la colectiva de justicia del lenguaje, y soy una de las intérpretes de hoy.
Good afternoon. My name is Maria Garza, and I'm part of Comal Interpretation Collective, and we'll be providing interpretation for this webinar today.
Primero que nada, quiero agradecer a los organizadores de este seminario web por priorizar la justicia del lenguaje.
First, we want to give thank you to the organizers of this event to allowing us to present, to have language justice on this event.
La justicia del lenguaje es el derecho a participar plenamente con el idioma que la persona se siente más cómoda. Language justice is the right to participate fully with the language they feel most comfortable. Nosotros creemos que la justicia se puede alcanzar a través de la solidaridad significativa que transciende las barreras lingüísticas. We believe that justice can be achieved through meaningful solidarity that transcends language barriers. Antes de empezar, queremos compartir unas cuantas pautas que todos podemos usar para crear este espacio multilingüe. Es importante mencionar que todos nosotros somos responsables en esto. Before we start, we want to share some guidelines for everyone to use so we can create a multilingual space. It's important to mention that we're all responsible for this. Primero, como estamos en un espacio virtual, les queremos pedir que antes de hablar digan su nombre para que todos sepan quién es la persona que habla. First, before we speak, because we're in a virtual space, we ask that everyone you speak say their name so that everyone knows who's speaking. Segundo, hay veces que las personas están bien emocionadas cuando hablan, que hablan súper rápido y nosotros, los intérpretes, no podemos entender todo. Si eso pasa, nosotros haremos esta señal para indicarles que hablen más despacio y lo vamos a poner en el chat box. Secondly, there are times where the person gets really excited when they speak super fast and interpreters can't understand. If this happens, we will make a signal on the chat box to let them know to speak more slowly. Otras veces nos ponemos un poco nerviosos y empezamos a murmurar y nosotros los intérpretes no podemos entender tampoco. Si es así, nosotros haremos una señal o un símbolo para indicarles que hable un poquito más claro. Other times we get a little nervous and begin to mumble and interpreters can't really understand. If this happens, we'll just make a sign to make sure that the speakers speak a little bit more clearly. También les vamos a recordar que por favor hablen una a la vez, porque estamos en un espacio virtual y no queremos priorizar una voz sobre la otra. Y también les queremos pedir cordialmente que por favor sigan con el mismo idioma, porque Zoom lo hace difícil para cambiar de idiomas en medio de una oración. We also want to remind you to please speak one at a time so that we don't have to prioritize one voice over the other. And we also kindly ask that you try to stick with one language when speaking because Zoom makes it difficult to switch mid-sentence between language. Cuando la interpretación se haga disponible, podrá ver el globo terráqueo y escoger un lenguaje. Recuerden que si no quieren escuchar el audio original, pueden apagarlo. When the interpretation is enabled, you will see a globe at the very end to choose the language you are participating in. Remember that if you don't want to hear the original audio, you can turn it off. Por último, si tienen algún problema con la interpretación, por favor de comunicarse con los organizadores o el anfitrión y no sufran en silencio. Y también les vamos a pedir que si no están hablando, de por favor ponerse en silencio. Lastly, if you have any problems with interpretation, please communicate with the host and do not suffer in silence. We're also asking you to please go on silent if you're not speaking. Muchas gracias y eso es todo. Thank you so much and that is all.
Thank you very much. We
will ask the host to please turn on the interpretation at this time. Vamos a pedir que por favor prendan la interpretación en este momento.
Thank you. We will give a brief pause for people to click on the interpretation option. Welcome, everyone. Again, we're really excited that you're here for the Right to Justice Cite and Release webinar. My name is Megan Harding, and I will be your moderator tonight, along with Nayolis Palomo of the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. I'm a senior attorney for Texas Civil Rights Project. The Right2Justice Coalition is a collective of local, statewide, and national organizations dedicated to a community-driven policy platform with the explicit goal of reforming the City of Houston and Harris County criminal justice systems. The purpose of the webinar tonight is to be an educational webinar with local advocates as we discuss the policies, status, goals, and actions needed for a robust cite and release program in Houston. I will take a moment just to introduce our speakers for the night. We have Judge Franklin Bynum, who is a Harris County judge in charge of County Court number 8. We have Jordan Buckley, who's the political director and co-founder of Mano Amiga. We have Gracie Armijo, who is with Texas Organizing Project. And we have Anita Gupta, who is a staff attorney for the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. And you will hear from all of them at some point throughout the night. So would you please advance the slide. So our agenda for today is, first, we will give an overview of what cite and release is. You will hear about examples from other Texas cities, the current status of what's happening in Houston, the goals for Houston, what we believe is achievable and should happen. And then we will take some time to have Q&A with the audience. And then there will be a call to action and some resources for how you can get involved in fighting to improve the cite and release program in Houston and Harris County. And so first, we just want to start with an overview of what cite and release is. The Texas legislature passed a law many, many years ago that allow municipalities, cities, and counties to decide whether or not they wanted to authorize their police officers to only give citations instead of arrests for certain types of offenses. And you'll hear more about that later in detail, but that's the gist. And so we want you to understand the problem and how it's affecting us. And we always want to be aware that we can talk about policies in the abstract, but at the end of all of these policies are human lives, and there's a real human impact. And that's what we're fighting for. We're fighting to improve the lives of people and for people to be able to experience a true justice system. And so with that, I would like to toss to Gracie Armijo to tell her personal story that relates to cite and release.
Hi, thank you, Megan. My name is Gracie, and I am I'm currently serving as a community organizer on the Right to Justice campaign with Texas Organizing. And I've been engaging communities of color throughout the city of Houston for more than 3 years and helping shape leaders who will join to fight to end mass incarceration. I was born and raised in the East End, a neighborhood of people of color that was over-policed and over-incarcerated and underfunded and underinvested. People there rarely got the justice that they deserved. My passion for the criminal justice reform is rooted in my experiences with a system that was designed to crush people like me. I lost my father in 1980 when he was caught in the crossfire between police and a suspected murder, a police officer that was also fatally shot. I'll never forget how everyone who responded to the scene ignored my father as he lay dying and instead focused on the dead police officer. A decade later, I lost my brother and my oldest son in an accident. They were being pursued by police and their car flew over an overpass. It was the darkest day. I'm so sorry. It was the darkest day of my life. A few years later, I was mired in my grief and struggling to meet ends meet. And I was a single mother of two, and working minimum wage jobs. I miscalculated my bank account. My funds and checks bounced. And as I attempted to make things right, I was arrested and jailed. Jail's a horrible place, and I was strip searched. One of the most humiliating experiences of my life. I was placed in a cell, and I would stay there until I could placed in a cell, and told I would stay there until I could buy my freedom or plead guilty. An assistant DA said if I didn't plead guilty, I would be facing some serious jail time. A guilty plea would not only save me from potentially having to do such a long sentence, but would let me go home right away. It seemed like an easy choice. I had to go home. So I took the plea. I pleaded guilty. I didn't have time to think about how it would affect me, how it would impact me in the long run. I was just another case that needed to be disposed of, not a human being who would be saddled with an unjust guilty plea that would hurt me and my chances to find a job or housing. Had Cite and Release been implemented, then I have not gotten arrested for a nonviolent charge, and I would not have I wouldn't have worried about losing the job that was only paying minimum wage to survive. I could have been given a chance to pay the people where my checks bounce. That would have been justice. This is a struggle that people of color go through every day, and it's not fair or just. Why are we destroying lives needlessly? We can and must do better. But despite everything I've experienced, I feel blessed that I get to fight every day to change the system and make justice accessible for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Gracie, for your vulnerability, for your willingness to share your story and your pain with us. We really appreciate it. We don't take it for granted. There are significant collateral consequences when people are jailed for low-level things. There's this disruption of family, which you hear in Gracie's story. There's the potential for job loss, which you also hear. Sometimes there's the ability to lose housing because people have lost their jobs and can no longer pay for it. And so that's disrupted, as well as significant immigration consequences for really, really low-level offenses. And so there is a real human cost to not having a robust Cite and Release program. And I want to tell you a little bit about the statistics in Houston. Can you advance the slide? So what we found was that Houston police data, which was analyzed from June 14, 2014 to March 3rd of 2020, indicated that there was a little bit over 29,000 arrests that were citation eligible. What that means is that they were the type of offenses that the police officers could have chosen to give a citation for instead of arrest. So could have cited someone, let them go, and they will come back to court later to handle the citation. They found was that Black people represented nearly 50%, 49% of all citation eligible arrest, whereas white people represented 16%. And so we see large racial disparities in the treatment of people, and really racism infused into these arrests. And so if you look solely at the misdemeanor possession of marijuana, so this doesn't include all of the citation eligible offenses, but you just take one type. So you take marijuana. Black people represented 63%. 63% of all citation eligible possession of marijuana arrests, whereas white people represented just 7%. That means that Black people were 9 times more likely to be arrested for misdemeanor possession of marijuana than white people during the same time frame. That is unacceptable. And you have to remember, like we heard in Gracie's story, that means that Black people were facing significant life consequences because of these arrests in comparison to their white counterparts. So with that, we would like to dig a little bit deeper into cite and release. What is it? The history, the process, policy, and the jurisdictions. We want to explain the difference between county and city. So at this point, we will now pass to Anita Gupta.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you to Gracie for sharing your story. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So what is cite and release? So as Megan briefly mentioned in the beginning, cite and release is basically a policy that directs or tells police officers to issue citations or tickets for certain low-level offenses instead of making arrests and taking people to jail. Also, in a cite and release policy, an officer could issue a citation or ticket, or even issue just a warning instead of making an arrest. And so under current law, though, the problem is really that officers can choose to arrest instead of issuing a citation or ticket. And as we know from lived experience, and the data shows that due to racist policing, officers often arrest Black and brown people at much, much higher rates than white folks. In the current cite and release system or policy, what happens is if a person is accused of a low-level citation eligible offense, that person will get a summons or a citation that directs them to go to court on a certain date and time to handle their charge or charges, and they'll be processed through the court system, but they will avoid arrest, they'll avoid being sent to jail. Next slide, please. So what are the goals of cite and release? So we want to reduce overall arrests. If this policy says officers have to issue citations, tickets, or warnings instead of making arrests, then we know that we're going to reduce overall arrests through a cite and release policy. We also want to completely eliminate arrests for low-level offenses. We know that people don't need to be arrested for those kinds of low-level offenses. And as Megan mentioned, those arrests can have really, really harmful consequences for people's lives. We want to reduce racial disparities in policing. Since Black and brown folks are often arrested at much higher rates than white people, having a policy that tells officers that they can't choose to arrest versus cite someone, they need to equitably utilize this policy for all people. They can't just choose to arrest a Black person and then cite a white person. They have to apply this policy uniformly. We want to increase data transparency. We, as the public, we want to know who are the police arresting and why. We want to bring some of these issues of high arrests, racial disparities in policing, racist policing. We want all of that to be publicly available information so that we can hold the city accountable for its actions. And we want to decrease the arrest to deportation pipeline. I'm going to get into that a little more in a minute, but we know that the criminal and immigration systems are intertwined, and that many, many folks end up in deportation proceedings because of arrests, because of criminal arrests. And so we want to decrease the arrest to deportation pipeline by reducing arrests altogether. Next slide, please. So this may be obvious, but why citation in lieu of arrest? Why is the citation better? Well, because we want to avoid those harmful effects of arrest, such as the effects of loss of housing or not being able to find future housing, loss of income, loss of jobs, having trouble getting jobs in the future because of having an arrest record, a criminal record. We know that when a person spends even just one night in jail, it can have devastating consequences. They, can't make it to work. They may not have childcare lined up. So we want to avoid all those harmful effects. As well, we know that actually the majority of immigration arrests or ICE arrests are a direct result of interactions with local law enforcement. So this issue really hits our immigrant community hard because when people are arrested for even just low-level, very minor offenses, if they're undocumented or subject to deportation for other reasons, they are often going to be transferred directly to ICE instead of being released back to their families, and they will face deportation. And so, as I mentioned before, reducing arrests also reduces deportations. And in the context of COVID-19 and this worldwide pandemic that we're facing, when we see these huge COVID-19 outbreaks, particularly in the Harris County Jail, we know that an arrest and being sent to jail can mean a higher chance of infection and potentially even death. Next slide. So how is cite and release possible? So our state legislature passed a law in 2007 that says that local law enforcement agencies, such as city police, may issue citations instead of arrest for low-level offenses. I'm going to get into which offenses those are in a moment. But the issue with this state law is that it left open the choice to utilize cite and release and to what extent. So what we see is that many law enforcement agencies don't utilize cite and release at all. Some utilize it a little bit, but not to the full extent. And so it's really not a uniform policy. And there have been attempts to get a uniform state law that tells officers to issue citations in all cases at the state legislature, but that hasn't passed. So currently we have the state law from 2007 that allows local law enforcement agencies to issue citations instead of arrests, but leaves the choice to them. Next slide. So what are these citation eligible offenses? So first we have all Class C misdemeanors. So Class C misdemeanors are the lowest level or most minor offense in our Texas penal system. Class C misdemeanors are punishable by fine only and include traffic offenses and other minor offenses such as possession of drug paraphernalia, disorderly conduct, public urination, things like that. There's a very long list of Class C misdemeanors. It also includes certain Class A and B misdemeanors, which are slightly higher level offenses than Class C misdemeanors, and includes possession of marijuana up to 4 ounces, so low level possession of marijuana. Possession of what essentially is synthetic marijuana, also up to 4 ounces. Criminal mischief with damage up to $750. Criminal mischief is basically when somebody damages another person's property, maybe perhaps out of anger. So for example, if someone gets angry and keys your car or breaks your window, but not with the intention to rob you, just to damage the property, that would be criminal mischief. Theft of up to $750 worth of property, theft of up to $750 worth of services. Theft of services is like if, for example, it's like if you go to dinner at a restaurant and you have dinner and then you leave without paying, that would be a theft of service. Contraband in a correctional facility never comes up. I'm not even going to explain what it is. Driving while license invalid is if you're, caught driving with like a revoked license or a suspended license. I will note that driving without a driver's license is a Class C misdemeanor and is also citation eligible. And lastly, graffiti. Next slide, please. So what do cite and release policies do? As I mentioned earlier, they tell officers to issue citations or tickets instead of making arrests for citation eligible offenses. If you look at a cite and release policy, you'll usually see that there are some disqualifying circumstances. That means that like if certain circumstances are present, an officer may still make an arrest, such as if the person cannot produce any sort of ID, or if the person is a danger to themselves or others. Those are examples of disqualifying circumstances. But if no disqualifying circumstances are present, then the officer should always issue a citation or a ticket or a warning. Strong cite and release policies often require releasing public data reports. So the police have to compile data and release data reports to the public about their use of the cite and release policy. So we can see how well it's being implemented. Are they continuing to arrest Black and brown folks at higher rates than white folks? Why are they continuing to arrest people? What are the disqualifying circumstances that they claim are present? Those are all things that we would find out through public data reports. Next slide. So what is the difference between like an administrative policy and an ordinance? So I'm going to start with an ordinance. So as a lot of you know, an ordinance is basically a law that's passed by the city, by the mayor and city council. An ordinance then becomes city law. So in a cite and release policy, if that were to be passed through an ordinance, the police would really have to follow the law because that is city law telling them you must issue citations whenever possible. On the other hand, city council could pass a resolution. A resolution is not as strong as an ordinance because a resolution is more of a statement from city council encouraging the use of the cite and release policy, but it's not law. And the weakest form of a cite and release policy is an administrative policy, which is basically an internal department policy saying, okay, internally the police chief is going to tell his officers utilize cite and release, but there's no transparency, there's no city council providing for accountability. It's just an internal policy, and so there's less ability for the public to hold the city police department accountable. And now I'll pass it to Judge Bynum, who can talk to us about the difference between city and county policies.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Franklin Bynum. I use he, him pronouns. Most people just call me Judge. I'm the judge of Harris County Criminal Court at Law number 8. And can we get the next slide, please? I'll just jump into, oh wait, go back then, I'm sorry. I thought there was something else there. So what I'm here to tell you about is kind of the history of, well, I mean, I guess this particular part is just, the county runs the courts, but most police are run by local governments. We have dozens and dozens of small police forces here in Harris County. I forgot the exact number, but it's approaching 100, right? The Medical Center Police Department, West University Police Department, and on and on. not to mention larger ones like Pasadena, Jersey, Jacinto City. And so they all have different paper systems. They all have different ways of doing what they do. So at the county level, what your elected judges are doing to implement cite and release is creating the technical thing that is changing the courts so that when local police are pressured to use it, it's here and it's ready to go. And so we've been working really hard to do that for a long time. But that's the big difference. The courts are county or subdivisions of the state, and most police are city and municipal. And so the pressure that needs to happen moving forward, which we'll talk about later, really needs to be on those local departments.
Thanks, Judge Bynum. I think at this point, we will go back to Anita Gupta to talk us through some of the reforms that we've seen in other Texas cities, and as well as Jordan Buckley.
Thank you. Could you advance the slide, please? Okay, so cite and release policies have been in place in a number of cities across, well, first across the country, and in multiple cities across our state of Texas. So Jordan and I are just going to really briefly go over two examples. The first one is in Austin, and these are called Freedom City Resolutions. The Freedom City Resolutions were passed in 2018, and were really a response to racist policing and racist jailing. A report came out that gave hard data showing racist policing and jailing. And also it was a response to SB 4, Senate Bill 4, which is our anti-immigrant state law that went into effect in 2017. And so these resolutions aim to prevent arrests, incarceration, and deportation, reduce racial disparities in policing, increase data transparency, and uplift immigrants' constitutional rights. So the first resolution is a cite and release policy. It's city council telling the police you should issue citations whenever possible, and you need to issue quarterly data reports showing us how you're using the cite and release process. The second resolution was more immigration focused and does a few different things. Also requires some data transparency, but it requires that police have to inform people of their right to remain silent before asking questions about immigration status. And if they are doing things like asking about immigration status or calling ICE, they have to report it out and make that information available to the public. The piece about reducing arrests and cite and release policies actually resulted in a huge reduction in arrests for citation eligible offenses. Actually, arrests for citation eligible offenses went down approximately 75%, although we do still see some racial disparities. And really importantly, the resolutions created this working group of community members, community representatives, and the police department that meets monthly to address issues in implementation, issues with the data, and other ongoing issues to make sure that this cite and release policy is being implemented effectively and equitably for all of our city's residents. And I'll pass it to Jordan.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jordan, and I'm part of Mano Amiga, which is started as an immigrant rights organization in 2017. And we began by leading deportation defense campaigns. And in 5 of the cases which we fought, 2 of the individuals were actually arrested after citation eligible offenses. Anita referred to Senate Bill 4, which, as she mentioned, means that when people arrive in a county jail, they are transferred to ICE, the arrest to deportation pipeline, as she said. And so we looked at trying to pursue cite and release policy as a means to stop people from being turned over to the deportation system. we initially started kind of bringing up the issue, and a number of different candidates in San Marcos and Hays County sort of latched onto it. Several of them actually won office. And at that point, we pushed the city council to create a criminal justice reform committee, with this being the charge that we would want them to pursue. And similarly on the county, they had a body that was tasked with criminal justice that hadn't met in months. And so we essentially shamed them into waking up from their slumber to look at these sorts of policies. We then also were able to get data from the county that showed what the breakdown was, similar to what Megan had showed earlier, of who was benefiting from Cite Release, which is people that look like me, and those who were not. And so if you don't mind moving to the next slide, please. And here's a story that after we had this data, we kind of sat on it for a few months trying to figure out the best time to release it strategically. And we learned that a gentleman was going to be, he was hoping to be confirmed as the interim police chief at city council. So that preceding weekend, we sent out a press release with the findings of this data, which included the fact that no one Black benefited from Cite Release in the entire year of 72 opportunities. And, you know, it was widespread throughout the press. And put a lot of pressure on our interim police chief as he was at the stand set to, you know, become the police chief to commit to expanding Cite and Release. After months, we found that that Cite and Release expansion really didn't happen. And so it made a wonderful case for the need for an ordinance. And so we, if you don't mind the next slide, please. And so we continued to build our coalition locally. Doing so, you can see at the very center bottom, we put out flyers at different head shops around town, asking who had been arrested for pot. We would scan on the bottom left, you'll see the blotter that's printed, unfortunately, in the newspaper that talks about who got arrested for what, and kind of through that able to try to meet the people that had been arrested and speak to them about their cases, as well as highlighting the injustice of locking people up for these low-level crimes that a predominantly Republican legislature, as well as Governor Perry, signed into law back in the day. And then we did things like, you know, protests. We made, you can see silk screening on the top left, where we set up in front of city council and silk screen the statistic of how many people actually were arrested for citation eligible offenses, which was 77% in 2019, and made t-shirts and just basically made that statistic very present in the minds of residents in San Marcos, that over 3/4 of people were going to jail needlessly when they could just be written a citation instead. And so we continued to organize and built a larger coalition, both frankly with pot smokers, but as well as a more multiracial coalition comprised of students and other community groups who are just sick of being over-criminalized. And so kind of with that intersection of those two communities, really built a lot of power. We're able to circulate a petition. We hosted poetry slams, held pickets. There was a poll in the newspaper asking what people thought about it, and we were able to mobilize a ton of support for that. And in the end, our city council did vote in April 4-3 to go ahead and create the first city law in Texas to restrict officers' ability to arrest people for citation eligible offenses, with the guidance of Immigrant Legal Resource Center, who was absolutely crucial.
Thanks, Jordan and Anita. That's really awesome. What you see here is the power of organizing and really creative organizing. And later we're going to talk about how you can get involved in, and I hope that you remember this section. Also, to just clarify for people, so there's been other cities that have passed resolutions, meaning that they have strongly encouraged police departments to take responsibility on their own for passing policies that expand Cite and Release. San Marcos, though, became the first city where the city council officially passed an ordinance that required it. So that's sort of the difference in what's happening in the cities. Now we're going to go to Judge Bynum to talk about Houston and Harris County specifically.
Thanks, Megan. And that is such a great example of the good work happening in other parts of the state. And now what I'm going to kind of zero in on is what's going on in Houston and Harris County. So I'm going to talk about where we're coming from, what we've done to implement it, and then where to go from here. So could I see the next slide, please? And just go to the next one. Let's see. So the first thing I want to say is that Cite and Release is a really important strategic goal that I hope at the end of this you will share my enthusiasm for and get to work with me trying to make it bigger and better. And yet, we are trying to work towards a world where we're not using police for these things. This is a harm reduction strategy, right? It's not, you know, it's not just that we want people to get a ticket in lieu of arrest. It's that we don't want the punishment bureaucracy to be making these types of interventions. But in the meantime, as we work quickly as we can towards a better, more caring, just world, this is a very important tool in the toolbox, and there's a huge upside. And so, but it always needs to be understood in that context. So next slide, please. In Harris County, when I think it was Jordan that said that it was a Republican legislature that passed Cite and Release, and these local governments kind of balked for all the reasons that police balk at all kinds of other things that they're asked or required to do. But the common refrain, and those of you who have been around here recently know, is we'd love to, but this, right? We're a reformer, but there's this problem. And for many years, the problem around here was that it was a technology problem. Can I get the next slide? Devin Anderson was in favor of Cite and Release. You know, Kim Ogg likes to say that she's in favor of it, but frankly, so was Devin Anderson, right? But she just said it was a software problem, and that was the line for many years. And so the next, please. And so we'll get to this in a sec. What we did when I took office was I got on the tech committee, and I said, if this is a technical problem, then we're going to solve it. And the truth is that there were many technical problems to solve, right? We're trying to reimagine, redo this large, complicated punishment bureaucracy. And but I want to, but we did it, and I'm getting there. I wanted to stop right here and say something else that Devin Anderson, I think, said she was for, but Kim Ogg says she's for, is diversion, right? Which is, so like in Harris County, we have the misdemeanor marijuana diversion program. That is not Cite and Release, right? That is where the piece of paper they give you is actually not a piece of paper saying go to court, but a piece of paper saying contact the DA, right? And then the DA, you pay the fee to the DA and the courts aren't involved. So, you know, that is the difference, and we can talk strategically about what to emphasize later, but I wanted to make that distinction. So could you get the next, please? It took weekly meetings for over a year to get it done. We have a whole new physical courtroom where people can report with the date on the summons. We have new staff. We have all, I mean, it did take time to do, but it's ready, and we have a lot of capacity. I will be honest with you that we are just getting started. And the agencies that we have, could I see the next, please? I think that's where that is. Right. So far, it's the sheriff's office, which actually is more of kind of a street patrol type of police than a lot of people in the inner city know, because they're in a lot of the unincorporated areas. Constable Precinct 1, I think one more constable's office, I forgot which one, and Pasadena PD. So are all participating right now. But what we need, and the system works really well, and there's a whole mechanism. They can come to the committee, which is still meeting weekly, and we are ready and willing. We have a multi-agency task force that is standing by to help this happen and help ramp this up. So could I see the next slide, please? So that really raises the question, what about HPD? I heard that we have, you know, America's woke police chief working here. It turns out that HPD is not a participant in the Cite and Release program. And I've had many people in the past few weeks, given the events of, you know, people being in the streets and so on, about many different problems related to this, and saying that, well, Art Acevedo says that HPD is going to do Cite and Release. Well, I would know on on any given Thursday at 1:30 if HPD were making any progress on cite and release. And I have not, I asked today because tomorrow is the meeting. There's not been a word from them. And to be candid and to be honest with you, one of the biggest impediments in our meetings was HPD, right? Who would send an assistant chief, who would send Assistant Chief Bainbridge, and they were there to talk about technical implementation, right? How to link up their systems. It's called Tiburon and Superion, and it's a very strange thing that these systems are named after predatory sea creatures. I guess the vendor knows their audience, but they were there to do technical implementation, but instead what they wanted to do was come in and talk about, make up non-appearance rates and say things like, we need to get the prints at the time of arrest because we use those prints to solve murders, is what they told me. And so we're talking about a self-checkout. We're talking about Kroger calls about, you know, someone at the self-checkout who didn't scan something, right? And they're talking, and they want to just reach and talk about murders. So that's where we're at with HPD, and I'm sure they'd love to hear from you about it. I would love if they heard from you about it. Let's see the next slide. So, you know, as we move forward, we did it. We built something that works. I run it every Wednesday at 1:30 at 49 San Jacinto. I encourage you to stay home and stay safe, but as soon as you can, I would love to show it to you and show you what we built here. We have a huge, huge capacity. We can take every eligible offense in the county and issue a citation for it. And so don't back down if anyone tries to tell you that it's not practical or that the scale doesn't work. We built something where it absolutely will. And so, you know, please shoot the moon on it. We need to reduce arrests now more than ever. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Judge Bynum. Really appreciate your insight as well as the information on HPD. It's really important, people, that you pay attention to what people are doing, not just what they are saying. And so with that, we want to talk about what are the goals for Houston. And so Nayolis Palomo will take over from here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Megan. So after we've heard the different types of examples that have happened in other localities, Houston and the Right2Justice Coalition wanted to come up with different type of solutions that we can actually implement in Houston. So what are our goals for Houston? First, we want the city of Houston to actually implement a very strong cite and release ordinance. And we want this ordinance to make sure that it directs officers to issue citations or warnings instead of making arrests, just like you heard Anita describing, for all the different types of citation eligible offenses, including Class C, Class A, and Class B misdemeanors. Like it was mentioned earlier in the presentation, we are going, you know, we're shooting for the moon with this particular goal. And we want to make sure that the city of Houston can implement a very strong cite and release ordinance. With that being said, we want to make sure that we can reduce any type of harmful effects of having a record. So we want to make sure that in Houston we can have a robust program, a program that we can make sure that, you know, the city of Houston can implement and work in collaboration with the Harris County DA's office and the public defenders to explore the different possibilities of an associated pre-charge diversion programs. And this is something that we have seen in Bexar County, that Bexar County has done pretty well. So we want to make sure that if we have a robust program, we can reduce any type of harmful effects of having a record. So we want to make sure that after we have an actual ordinance, the city of Houston is able to work with the district attorney's office and the public defender's office to actually have a robust and very strong cite and release ordinance that also allows for pre-charge diversion programs to be incorporated in this type of programs. Next slide, please. Alrighty, so now we are moving on to Q&A, to questions. So we want to allow everybody a few minutes to ask any questions on, if you are watching via Facebook Live, if you can please insert your questions on Facebook. And then if you are here on Zoom for Spanish interpretation, if you can please type your questions on the chat box. under the Q&A so we can make sure to answer any questions that you may have for any of us or for any of the presenters for today. So we'll give it a few minutes to see if anybody else has any questions, and then I'll make sure to read any questions that you post to the presenters. Okay, we have one question for Judge Bynum. What do you think are the barriers to an ordinance in Houston?
It's a great question. Thank you so much for it. And again, I don't think I said thanks for the chance to come and speak to you about it. I've been holed up in county offices about this for a long time, and I'm happy to be out and talking to people about it. I think that it's the same impediments, I think, to a lot of other things. Defunding the police, all of these larger goals, is that you have local leadership that is not honest about their intentions, not including me and the judges, but you have people saying, oh, wait, no, we're already doing that, right? And there's this whole confusion wall that they put up. And so that is the first impediment. I want to say one more thing about it as far as impediments. Something I'm fond of thinking and saying and living out is that, like, power understands power, and it's really all it understands. And when we talk about defunding the police, we added one jurisdiction, one department right after COVID hit, because they realized they didn't have the resources to go and devote several uniformed police to, like, the person who didn't scan an item at the self-checkout, right? Because we had a pandemic. It took that. So that is what, this can be a component of a larger strategy of defunding the police. Like, you are spending insane resources on stuff that we don't want you to be, So I think that the dishonesty of the leaders, and then second, I think that we need to adopt a strategy more direct of just not funding a lot of this police activity that is not necessary and we don't want or need. So don't ask for too little is what is put it in a bumper sticker.
That's great. I have another question that came on the Zoom, and it says, what can we do to force HPD to implement cite and release?
I'm sure that, does anyone want to answer?
I can briefly speak. So, one way to do it would be to do what San Marcos did, which, Jordan spoke about, which is to create a, community-led campaign and get city council to pass a cite and release ordinance that directs police officers to have a robust cite and release policy that they have to follow.
Yes, and I'm going to be speaking actually a little bit later about how you can actually join the Right2Justice Coalition campaign on passing a cite and release ordinance in Houston. So I'll be sharing a little bit more information about that later, so you can join the campaign and see what else can we all do together to make sure this happens in Houston. We have other questions. One question from Facebook. What can we do about a mentally challenged Hispanic man that is not competent to stand in court, but they are going to rehabilitate him enough so that he can stand competent enough for court? What should we do about that, and how can they get help?
Sure, I'd be happy to answer. I was a mental health public defender, and so I think that the situation, as I understand it, it describes a really particular kind of problem, which is that many people in our community, because are so have such have a disability such that they can't even understand the nature of court proceedings, such that, like, even if they wanted to make some resolution, negotiate some resolution, that the law wouldn't even let them, because in the eyes of the law, they can't comprehend what's happening to them, you know? And so I think that the answer is, and so what the punishment bureaucracy's answer to this problem is the state hospital system, which is a system of statewide jails for sick people that are there only because they're sick, to be restored to competency so they can come back and plead guilty to something, usually, right? It's a crazy system. So what we need is more investment in actual public health, right? We need Medicare for all. We need, if someone is sick, they don't need to go to a system that they can't comprehend, you know, they need treatment. And the idea that the only way we are going to treat people is by putting them in this punishment system, it's really one of the worst parts to me, because like I said, I represented many of those people at the public defender's office, and the idea that you'd be arrested for trespassing and then go into legal limbo for 6 months just because you were sick, it hurts my heart even just to think about. So more services, Medicare for all, more hospitals, more treatment, more housing for people. That's the answer.
Thank you, Judge. We have other questions. What citation eligible offenses, including Class Cs, are receiving the most pushback by local leaders or other stakeholders in implementing a cite and release policy in Houston and San Marcos? Best arguments to counter.
Yeah, I'd say the ones that got the most pushback were the quote unquote crimes with victims. So like property theft. There were people concerned about local businesses saying that they were concerned if someone didn't go to jail before their court date, then that would encourage more shoplifting, and people would say, oh, people are going to find out that San Marcos is a haven for criminals, and so people are going to come to San Marcos just so they can take advantage of the cite and release policy. And we would remind them that you must be a resident of the county to actually qualify for cite and release, so no one can come in and take advantage, as it were. You know, I think that where there were going to be upset people if someone doesn't go to jail that day was where there was the most pushback. But I think just generally this kind of sacred cow of police discretion. You know, in our case, we got pushback from the statewide police union, who took out advertisements that I would argue were racist, targeting our city council members who were supportive, in what looked like a wanted ad, or not like a wanted poster, as if our council members were criminals, and the two council members of color who were supporting were the ones at the top of the ad, of course. And so there's a lot of pushback, I think, around the idea of not allowing cops to arrest whoever they want, whenever they want. Of course, this happened prior to all the protests in the wake of George Floyd's murder. So I think we're absolutely operating in a different universe than before that period. So back then, that was a very hard argument to make to many.
Thank you. Thank you, Jordan. Another question is, could a cite and release have been used with the protesters who were arrested?
I can speak to that real quick. I don't know what all people, I mean, the things that people were arrested for at the protests, from what I've seen, were not necessarily on that slate of offenses that is authorized by the legislature, right? And so I think this ties back to our, you know, what are some impediments, like asking for too little, you know? We should be expanding cite and release, going to the legislature and getting a list of more, but also I think that we really need to be looking at not using arrests for these things, whether it's people in the streets lawfully protesting or the person who doesn't scan an item at the self-checkout, right? These are both things that arresting someone does nothing to help, and also further compounds the problem. So yes, I would have preferred that if the state wanted to initiate some formal legal proceeding against someone for lawfully protesting, that they would give them a piece of paper to do it. But more than that, I would rather that the police just not do it to start with, and that the DA just not do it to start with. Because, you know, make no mistake, the DA's office authorized those arrests and those detentions. There's no doubt, right? That is how the system works. I can tell you, knowing it, that is, I know it happened, right? So it's not a mystery. And so, yeah, that's technically no, I guess is the short answer. But they shouldn't have been arrested to start with, probably.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Judge Bynum. We have a few more questions. What resources are available for attorneys, or how can we assist outside of defending such cases?
I can speak briefly to that, but it'd be great if others chimed in. You know, I would say get involved in the fight. You know, we, especially criminal defense attorneys, really often have a wealth of knowledge about how the system works, but also like what's actually happening on the ground. And so providing that experience in, you know, shaping these policies and talking to community members and just like actually working hand in hand with the community to get involved with the fight is really impactful. Our organization, the ILRC, does that. We work hand in hand with organizers and communities on the ground. And, you know, we hope that that like legal and policy expertise that we provide can make these community-led campaigns stronger and more effective.
Perfect, thank you, Anita. And we have 2 more questions. How does Cite Release apply to incidents of domestic violence and keeping victims, survivors safe? Will perpetrators be directed to other community services, or will they be arrested?
The short answer is that there's no Cite and Release. Like it's not even in the ballpark of eligibility, right? It's not really, those types of situations are very complex social situations involving poverty and patriarchy and police violence and all kinds of things, right? And unwinding that situation you described in a way that's peaceful is a complex problem, right? And Cite and Release is not going to be necessarily the answer. Cite and Release as we understand it. I think that it is something that we need to look at if we're going to build a just society. What do we do in these situations, right? I think if you solve poverty and housing to start with, then a lot of the problem is, you know, if one of those people had somewhere to go, or both people did, or, you know, and on and on. But to answer the question, Cite and Release doesn't really apply to those situations, and I don't know what the time frame for a comprehensive look at something like that would be in this context.
Thank you, Judge. Other questions, what are any suggestions for other Texas cities that want to push for Cite and Release? I am from Laredo, and we are working on gathering research from our local PD and county sheriff's departments through public record requests. We are largely a 95% Hispanic community, and would that affect the disparities that Austin and San Marcos saw? How should we approach the data we gather?
I would just say too, if, you know, racial disparities aren't something that would be observed in Laredo, nonetheless, the rate at which they arrested people for citation eligible offenses is still a critical number. You know, for us, that 77%, almost everyone in town was very familiar with 77%, and that just represented how many people actually got arrested in opportunities when they could have instead been given a citation. So I would still find that very valuable for your campaign.
I would add too, if I may, that something that's really important strategically in these situations is to do a power mapping exercise in your community with the earlier question, what can lawyers do? Well, if you have knowledge about, a lot of lawyers don't even know this stuff, right? So public defenders are a great resource. And what you need to do is power map out kind of when someone does not, you know, allegedly fail to scan an item at the self-checkout at the Kroger or the H-E-B, right? What happens? Who picks them up? Where are they taken? Who do they see, right? And then draw all that out and then figure out your pressure points, because you're going to have to wrap all of the powerful interests. You're going to have to, because like we saw here when they said it was a technical problem, the DA said, well, we'd love to, but the clerk won't do it, right? And the clerk's like, we've left you, but no one told us to do that, right? And you go to the cops and they're like, we don't know what you're talking about. I don't know. Sounds all right, right? So you got to map it all out and have your demands square for all the people so that no one can point the finger or refer to you to someone else. And that's trickier. Statistics are one thing, right? And the disparities are so important, but you have to understand the people flow, you know, like where are the people going and who are they seeing and who is doing that? And then where is the line to democratic accountability from those spots? And we have a lot of it in Texas. We have elected judges, and I will have to stop and give a quick shout out, if I may, to our 16 county criminal court at law judges whose like unanimous, strong support. My colleague Daryl Jordan and I, Judge Daryl Jordan, you know, would stand up. I mean, the police were not friendly about this, you know, and we had to go to meetings and make this happen. And we had some uncomfortable meetings with people that did not want to do this, you know? And so I really am grateful to them for their strength. So if you were to draw a map around here, they'd be on it. Figure out who they are in your community and are they any good?
I think just one other thing I'd like to add is just how crucial it is to have the spokespeople be people that have, you know, lived this experience. You know, our organization, every one of us that's on staff has either been jailed or our family members have been incarcerated. And I think really to also just, you know, finding people that have been impacted by this policy and seeing who has the courage to kind of speak out about that situation. So that way, when the press comes, it's not like a hypothetical situation, but rather someone can speak, you know, from that experience. And I just think that's so crucial. And also, I don't think Gracie's on the call anymore, but I mean, just to lead with her story, for example, to set the tone is just so important that people that have skin in the game are the ones that are speaking about it.
100%. Yeah. And making sure that if there's any coalition that's already working on this, making sure you're joining forces with both the criminal justice, you know, advocates and the immigrants' rights advocates, and working on this together is going to be super key on working on trying to push for cite and release in your locality. And just like Jordan and Judge Bynum mentioned, making sure that you are power mapping, that's going to be crucial. You want to understand where everybody, you know, sits and how everybody feels about cite and release, making sure you want to identify who your champion can be in city council, or if it's going to be the mayor, if it's going to be different city council members, that's going to be really important. And I think data, it's so crucial. So I'm glad to hear that, yeah, have, you know, started doing the data research and making sure that you are educating, right, the public, just like we're doing right now, educating the public about what's happening in your locality and making sure that you are working and centering those directly impacted community members that have been affected by these issues. And lastly, we have one last question, and it is, what options do homeless individuals have when they are issued a citation for fare invasion on the Metro Rail?
I can speak to that some, just as far as what options there may be. You know, talking about the very many police departments we have locally and the difficulty of change when you have that many departments and things to deal with, you know, Metro PD is one. I know that the city and the county all run small kind of like fledgling operations to like the Ed Emmett Center, which, you know, in Midtown, like so they have a mental health, they have the sobering center. There are small, very beginnings of efforts, right, to people that are in need and maybe are somewhere that's not a place they need to be for one reason or the other, that they can go somewhere to get some help. But those options are really limited at this point. I mean, I remember being a public defender and being just like, okay, well, this person just needs housing, you know, and I could pick up the phone and call every org on the help card. But like, if there are no beds, then so there need to be more options, right? This is a recurring theme. There need to be things short of arresting or citation to deal with, you know, if somebody's sick on the train, you know.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, so much for all of the thoughtful questions. I hope that all of you were able to learn something new from all of them. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so the next thing is just our call to action. So what can you actually do to get involved in Houston with our Cite and Release campaign through the Right2Justice Coalition? So there are a couple of things that you can do to actually join us. The first thing is to sign up to receive alerts. We're going to be sending out a lot of emails and information about how you can sign up to testify, how you can join our protest, how you can help us with any infographics and materials like that we're going to be needing. So all the information that if you were able to register and sign up for the webinar today, we're going to be sending an email with all of this information, and we're going to send a sign up form where you can sign up to continue to receive alerts and different emails about how you can actually join forces with us. And on the form, it's going to ask you like your name, your email, how can we contact you, and in what ways can you support, and what can you do to actually help the coalition with Cite and Release. You can always share your story. I think stories are one of the most powerful tactics and tools that you can actually do. So if there's any time where there's going to be an opportunity to share your story with the different city council members, when there's going to be a chance to testify at city council, it's going to be really important that you can come and testify if you're able to. So making sure that you continue to share your story, or if you know somebody that has been affected by this type of issues, please let them know so they can join us as well. Another thing that you can also do is share this information with other community members. Again, as I mentioned, we're going to be sending out an email with a lot of resources and other toolkits, as well as this slides. So if you want to share this information with other people so they also learned about Cite and Release and what it is and what is happening in Houston and Harris County, it's going to be critical that you can also share that with other people and other community members so they know what's happening. And then also just encourage other people to join. If you found this to be something that you're truly passionate about and you feel like other people would also be interested in being part of this, please let them know how they can join our campaign by signing up on the form as well. And these are just some of the few things that you can do to actually join forces to push for a Cite and Release ordinance in Houston.
Thanks, Naya Elise. Really hope that people get involved. This is going to take all of us, as all of the reforms to our criminal legal system will. If you go to the next slide, please. Here's the contact information for everyone who was part of the webinar today. Feel free to reach out to us if you have questions about how you can get involved and what you can do. What we're really asking for is for our local cities, our localities, to start to reimagine public safety, reimagine what it means to have something be a crime, and whether or not vast personal consequences are needed level offenses. This can be done. We've seen it done in San Marcos. Thank you, Jordan and Anita, for your work there. And we know that ultimately it can be done in Harris County, and it can be done in Houston. Thank you, Judge Bynum, for the work that you've done since being elected to really try to move things forward. And so we realize that it's people like Gracie, her story, and others like her that are impacted at the end of all of these policies. And those are the people that we are fighting for. We're fighting so that all of us, that any one of us could be at risk for getting a citation, a low-level offense of something, even like a Class C traffic offense, and being arrested and having our lives significantly disrupted. And so we're fighting for a more humane justice system that treats people like their lives matter, and that roots out racism. So we hope that you will get involved. We hope that you will contact us. We appreciate you tuning in. And if there's anything that we can do to get information into the hands of people who want to join the movement to organize around Cite and Release, we will do everything that we can. Thank you again for tuning in. Feel free to reach out, and we just appreciate your participation.